For years, I thought my son would protect me if anyone ever tried to take advantage of me. I never imagined the person I'd need protection from would be his wife, or that he would quietly stand on her side. But Brenda made one mistake. She mistook my age for weakness. The white envelope sat between two cereal bowls, completely ignored. I reached across the kitchen island for my morning coffee, watching my daughter-in-law Brenda flip through her tablet without raising her eyes. My son Julian was staring blankly into his mug, his shoulders hunched in that familiar posture of conflict avoidance. I was 64, a retired community clinic nurse who had raised 2 kids on a single budget after my husband passed. I knew how to read room dynamics, and this room was heavy. Brenda finally set the tablet down and slid a thick paper folder toward me. "We talked to an elder care consultant yesterday, Evelyn." She said, her voice smooth and practiced like a pharmaceutical sales representative. "With your arthritis flaring up last month, keeping this place going is impractical. We need to consolidate. Julian and I will take over the primary management of your savings and property title. It's just safer." I looked at the paperwork. It was a power of attorney document granting them sweeping control over my bank accounts and my modest split-level house in suburban Ohio. I looked at Julian, waiting for him to speak, but he only shifted uncomfortably in his chair. When I gently pushed the folder back, Brenda's composure cracked. She scoffed, crossing her arms tightly. "You're too old to decide anything," Brenda said, her tone cutting sharply through the quiet room. "You're making things harder for everyone by holding on." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice or offer a defensive speech about my 30 years of handling medical emergencies. I just smiled softly at her, picked up my mug, and took a slow sip. The silence stretched until Brenda stood up and walked away. The next morning at 9, I sat in a downtown legal office. My attorney drafted one document, a revocable living trust amendment removing my son as sole independent executor and appointing a professional neutral fiduciary. The sound of my lawnmower filled the humid Tuesday afternoon air. I pushed the small electric mower across the front yard, taking deliberate steps to keep my pace steady. Brenda had called 3 times that morning, but I had left my phone inside on the counter. She wanted me to watch her 2 pedigree poodles while she went to an afternoon spa appointment. For 5 years, I had been the default safety net, the free babysitter, the house sitter, and the emergency chauffeur whenever her schedule demanded flexibility. When I finally stepped inside to pour a glass of cold water, the front door rattled open. Brenda walked into the kitchen without knocking, holding her car keys in one hand and a stack of mail in the other. She looked around the spotless room with a critical eye, stopping at the sink. "You shouldn't be pushing that mower, Evelyn," she said, setting her keys down hard. "The neighbors will think we're neglecting you. Besides, you missed my calls. I needed you at the house by 1. I had yard work to finish," I replied calmly, setting my glass down. "Julian and I are trying to streamline your life so you don't have these burdens," Brenda said, stepping closer. "Every time you insist on doing things yourself, it disrupts our family plans. You need structure, not independence." I wiped the counter with a damp cloth, observing her tense posture. This wasn't a sudden concern for my health. It was a repeated pattern of framing my autonomy as an inconvenience to her schedule. During my years as a nurse, I watched many adult children slowly erase their parents' agency under the guise of helpfulness. Brenda was trying to manage me like a project, expecting me to yield out of guilt or exhaustion. Julian walked in behind her, carrying a bag of groceries he had promised to drop off, looking everywhere except at my eyes. On Thursday morning, I changed my schedule. Normally, I spent my Thursdays cleaning Brenda and Julian's guest suite and preparing a big family dinner for 6 o'clock. Instead, I drove my sedan to the local senior community center on Elm Street. I had signed up to coordinate the volunteer health screening clinic 2 days a week. It was work I knew well, and it brought a familiar grounding rhythm back to my mornings. My phone rang at 4 in the afternoon while I was organizing blood pressure cuffs. It was Julian. "Mom, where are you?" he asked, his voice laced with stress. Brenda came home expecting dinner to be started. She had a long meeting today. "I'm at the community center, Julian," I said, keeping my voice steady and light. I've taken on a volunteer coordination role here. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Volunteer work. Mom, you said you were cutting back on activities. Brenda made plans based on you being at the house. I never confirmed I would be there today. I reminded him gently. There is leftover roast in your refrigerator from Tuesday. I'll see you both this weekend. I hung up before he could press further. When I returned home that evening, I found Julian's car parked in my driveway. He was waiting on the front porch, looking troubled. He stood up as I walked up the steps, holding a box of bakery cookies as a peace offering. Mom Brenda was really upset. He began trailing off as I unlocked the front door. She feels like you're pulling away from us. I'm simply managing my time, Julian, I said, inviting him inside. He followed me into the kitchen, looking around as if searching for signs of decline, but found only order. He didn't realize that my boundaries were shifting permanently. By Saturday morning, the atmosphere in my house had shifted, from quiet tension to cautious observation. Julian had dropped off a stack of utility bills he offered to organize, for me a task I had handled flawlessly since my husband died 12 years ago. He sat at my dining room table, flipping through the electric and water statements while I prepared tea in the kitchen. Brenda arrived 20 minutes later, wearing her workout clothes and carrying a tote bag. She didn't mention the missed dinner from Thursday, choosing instead to adopt an overly cheerful demeanor. Evelyn, we're going to clear out your hall closet today, she announced, stepping into the hallway without waiting for an answer. You have decades of old medical journals and winter coats taking up space. It's time to downsize. I walked out of the kitchen with 2 mugs of tea. The hall closet is fine, Brenda. I use those reference materials. They're outdated, she said, opening the closet door anyway and pulling out a heavy wool coat. Julian, come help me grab some storage bins from the garage. Julian looked up from the bills caught between his wife's insistence and my flat gaze. As he stood up, his arm brushed against my leather writing desk near the entryway. A manila envelope slid off the corner, spilling its contents across the hardwood floor. Brenda leaned down to pick them up, her eyes immediately catching the official letterhead of my estate attorney, Mr. Harrison. She paused, holding a legal notice that outlined a formal revision of my financial directives. Her smile vanished instantly. What is this? She asked, her voice dropping its artificial cheerfulness. Why are you receiving correspondence from a trust attorney? I took the papers from her hand without rushing, placing them neatly back into the envelope. My personal affairs are in order, I said quietly. Now please leave the closet as it was. The silence after they left was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. I sat at my kitchen table, looking out at the backyard maple tree. The encounter with Brenda had made one thing entirely clear. She didn't view my home as my sanctuary, but as an asset waiting to be managed. More importantly, Julian's inability to stand up for my independence showed me that relying on his protection was a mistake. That evening, I called my longtime friend Clara, who had retired from the county circuit court 5 years ago. We met at a quiet diner down the street. Over diner coffee and chicken salad sandwiches, I laid out the situation plainly. I didn't frame it with tears or dramatic grievances. I simply described the pressure, the subtle comments about my age, and the attempt to secure power of attorney. They think because you're quiet, you're passive. Evelyn, Clara said, wiping her glasses with a napkin. Brenda is used to directing things. If you don't build a firm wall now, she will slowly push you out of your own life. I know, I said. I spent 30 years in nursing homes and clinics watching families do this exact thing. It starts with small decisions, then larger ones, until the parent is a guest in their own existence. So, what's your next move? Clara asked. I've already met with Harrison, I replied. I'm removing Julian as my primary power of attorney. I'm appointing the bank's trust department to handle everything if I ever become incapacitated. But I need to take it a step further. I need to make sure my daily life isn't subject to their approval. Clara smiled knowingly. A neutral third party is the cleanest cut you can make. It takes the prize right out of her hands. I went home that night with a clear head. The emotional hurt was real, but my path forward was entirely within my control. On Monday morning, I met with Mr. Harrison again at his office downtown. The air in the legal suite smelled of old paper and leather, a comforting environment of order and facts. Mr. Harrison was a precise man in his late 50s who had handled my late husband's probate years ago. He reviewed the draft we had discussed the week before. Evelyn, under this new structure, your home and liquid assets will be placed into a fully protected living trust, Mr. Harrison explained, pointing to the key clauses with his pen. You remain the sole trustee with absolute authority as long as you are living and competent. In the event of your passing or incapacity, First National Trust takes over management, executing your specific directives without family oversight. And the power of attorney documents Julian signed 3 years ago, I asked. Completely revoked, Mr. Harrison said smoothly. This new filing supersedes all prior designations. Neither Julian nor Brenda will have legal standing to access your accounts, modify your property title, or make residential decisions on your behalf. I signed my name clearly on the dotted lines, watching the notary stamp each page with a crisp metal click. The process took less than 45 minutes, but the weight lifted from my shoulders was immense. After leaving the lawyer's office, I drove to the county clerk's building to record the deed transfer. Then I stopped by my bank. I updated my account signatures and explicitly instructed the manager that no information was to be released to family members without my written consent in person. By 3 p.m, my financial and legal boundaries were absolute. I drove home, parked in my driveway, and felt a profound sense of peace. I wasn't fighting Brenda. I was simply rendering her ambitions powerless. 3 days later, the storm arrived. I was in my garden trimming the hydrangeas near the porch when a large black SUV pulled up to the curb. A man in a high-visibility vest got out holding a clipboard, followed closely by Brenda. She walked up my driveway with purpose, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete. "Evelyn, good you're home," Brenda said without greeting me. "This is Mr. Vance from Premier Home Assessments. He's doing an appraisal for us." I set my garden shears down on the small wooden bench. "An appraisal for what, Brenda?" "We need an official valuation on the house," she said smoothly, waving her hand toward the facade. "Julian and I spoke with a real estate agent. Market values in this neighborhood are at a peak. If we list the house now, we can secure a prime 2-bedroom suite for you at the Oaks Senior Living Community before the waiting list closes in the fall." The appraiser looked uncomfortable, holding his clipboard at his side as he sensed the tension. He looked at me, waiting for confirmation. "Mr. Vance," I said, stepping forward with a calm, steady voice. "Did my son or daughter-in-law present you with a property deed or a signed authorization from the property owner?" The man blinked. No, ma'am. Mrs. Miller said she was handling the estate logistics for the family." "I am the sole owner of this property," I said, looking directly at Brenda. "There is no appraisal scheduled, and this house is not for sale. I must ask you to leave my property immediately." Mr. Vance didn't hesitate. He apologized, quickly turned around, and walked back to his vehicle. Brenda stood on the driveway, her face flushing red with embarrassment and anger, as the appraiser drove away. She couldn't believe I had dismissed him in broad daylight. "Joe, how dare you embarrass me like that?" Brenda snapped, her voice rising as soon as the appraiser's car cleared the street. "We are trying to protect your future? You are being completely unreasonable." Julian's car pulled up to the curb a moment later. He had clearly been told to meet them there. He stepped out, looking stressed and exhausted, walking quickly up the steps toward us. "Mom, what happened? Brenda just called me saying you threw the inspector off the property." "He wasn't an inspector, Julian. He was an appraiser," I said, turning my focus to my son. "Your wife brought a real estate professional to my home to value my property without my knowledge or consent." Julian rubbed the back of his neck, refusing to meet my eyes. "Mom, we were just looking at options. You know your knees have been bad. We thought if we sold now, you'd have enough capital to cover a luxury care facility for years, without worrying about maintenance. You didn't ask me what I wanted, Julian, I said softly. You allowed Brenda to make decisions about my life as if I were a child who couldn't speak for herself. Because you aren't thinking clearly, Brenda interjected, stepping between us. You are clinging to a 4-bedroom house out of stubbornness. You don't have the capacity to manage a property like this long-term. That is not your decision to make, Brenda, I replied. My tone was so quiet, and even that it halted her tirade mid-sentence. We have rights as your family to intervene when you're making poor choices. Brenda claimed, her posture rigid. You have no rights regarding my estate, I said plainly. Julian, come inside. Brenda, I think it is best if you return to your house now. Brenda glared at me, her mouth opening to object, but the finality in my expression stopped her cold. She turned on her heel and marched back to her SUV. Julian followed me into the kitchen, dropping his car keys onto the wooden table. He looked small, defeated by the conflict he had spent months trying to ignore. Mom, she's just worried about the future, he muttered, though his voice lacked any real conviction. She thinks we're going to end up having to handle a crisis if you fall or get sick. There is a difference between worrying about someone and trying to control them. Julian, I said, reaching into my desk drawer. I pulled out a sealed, certified letter from Mr. Harrison's office and placed it in front of him. What's this? Julian asked, hesitating before picking it up. It's a formal notice from my estate attorney, I said. Read it. Julian pulled out the document. As his eyes scanned the legal paragraphs, his face went pale. He read the clause revoking his power of attorney, followed by the establishment of the Irrevocable Living Trust managed by First National Bank. The document explicitly stated that no family member held administrative rights over my financial accounts, real estate, or medical directives. Mom, you completely removed me, Julian whispered, his voice cracking slightly. You replaced me with a bank. I replaced a conflicted situation with a neutral professional, I corrected him gently. You allowed your wife to attempt to sell my home out from under me. You stood by while she told me I was too old to decide anything. You gave up your role as my protector, Julian, so I had to protect myself. He sat down heavily in the kitchen chair, staring at the legal paper in his hands. 10 minutes later, his phone rang on the table. The screen displayed Brenda's name. Julian answered it on speaker, his hands trembling slightly. Julian, did you fix this? Brenda's voice blared through the speaker. Did you tell her we're filing for emergency guardianship? Julian looked up at me, then down at the document. Brenda, he said quietly. Stop. It's over. She put everything in an independent trust. We have zero legal authority. Nothing. The line went completely silent. The silence on the line lasted for almost a minute before Brenda hung up without saying another word. She didn't call back that evening, nor the next day. The realization that her influence had been completely neutralized by a single legal document had stripped away all her leverage. 3 months have passed since that afternoon in my kitchen. The dynamic in our family has shifted permanently, but it has settled into a quiet, functional reality. Brenda no longer visits my house, nor does she make demands regarding my schedule or my property. When I see her at family gatherings for the holidays, she is polite, distant, and extremely careful with her words. She learned that behind my quiet smile was an unyielding resolve. Julian comes over every Tuesday evening alone. We sit on the back porch, drink tea, and talk about his work and his life. Without his wife pushing him to manage my affairs, he has returned to simply being my son. The tension that used to fill his shoulders is gone, replaced by a genuine respect for the boundaries I established. He knows now that I am fully capable of navigating my own life. I still volunteer at the community health clinic twice a week. I hired a local college student to handle the heavy yard work, paying for it easily out of my independent budget. My home remains my sanctuary, filled with my books, my garden, and my memories. Old age does not mean the surrender of one's mind or dignity. I didn't need to yell, argue, or cause a scene to prove my point. I simply made a decision, signed my name, and let the law do the rest. My life belongs to me exactly as it should.